We were discussed about introduction to public sector, and we have discussed some sort of things in the slides. So already we have discussed about the definition for the term public sector, and identify different types of institutions in public sector. So there are ministries and agencies like a central bank and uh, corporations, companies, and statutory bodies, authorities, departments. So there are different types of institutions in public sector, and explain the scope of public sector. So as far as we discussed, the scope, some government organizations, no, public sector. So the influence of the government is varies depending on the type of the organization institutions. When we talk about ministries and departments, we can observe a full control of the government. So when we look at the companies, government companies, uh, the involvement of the government is very less. So we have discussed, and this slide also we have discussed, and yes, in the previous session, uh, the type of organization, right, this one, right. So different organizations define the term public sector differently according to their nature of operations. So in the previous class, we have discussed how IMF, International Monetary Fund, has defined public sector organizations. And also we have discussed a little bit on how the Ministry of Finance, how the Treasury has defined the public sector organizations. Now we look at how World Bank uh, defined public sector organizations. Right. It's called World Bank's approach. So according to the World Bank's approach to the public sector management, 2011 and 2012, the public sector comprises, so this ABC, right? The first, upstream or core ministries and central agencies. So when we look at the government, the cabinet, there are different types of ministries, different list of, right, a different number of, there are number of ministries, among which a very few ministries are very important for the government. So for example, Ministry of Finance Ministry, it's a core ministry, and the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Foreign Affairs, so the Ministry of Defense, which ministries are core, so very important. It's called upstream core ministries, and the central agencies. The most important agency the government is the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in terms of economics. So the government has implemented its economic policies through central bank. So central bank is the most important agency of the government. So the A consists of upstream core ministries and central agencies. And the second category, the downstream bodies including sector ministries. So upstream as a core ministries. Second one, downstream bodies like other ministries which are not much important for the stability of the government economy. Right? Say for example, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Labor. So this kind of ministries uh, does not much importance for the stability of the government. So the downstream bodies including sector ministries, and so we can say Ministry of Rural Development, and other Ministry of Technology, and no, it's not, which are not popular, right? And non-executive state institutions. So we can find the Supreme Court, Auditor General Department, Department of Auditor General, and Department of Registrar of Companies. So uh, there are some institutions, right? So it's called non-executive state institutions. So it's like kinds of a hierarchy, right? So first one, upstream core ministries and central agencies. Second one, downstream bodies, including sector ministries and non-executive state institutions. So this is how the World Bank has defined the public sector organizations. So let us discuss a little bit deeper. So, upstream bodies. So it includes core ministries and agencies at the center of the government, right? It's a center of the government. It's very important for the stability of the government, such as the Ministry of Finance and offices that support the head of the government, which have functions that cut across sectors. So the influence of which ministries, these ministries can be observed in all other uh, sectors. So Ministry of Finance proposes government budget. So these budget proposals impact each and every businesses in the country, right? And the policy implemented by the government through government agencies, for example, Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So it implements policies. So it decides the interest rate, right? Interest rate, and it decides uh, what the tax policies, right? So all the Department of Inland Revenue also coming under Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Finance, right? So these are the core, so which have functions that cut across the sector. So we can observe everywhere in other sectors too. So the influence of Ministry of Finance, not only it bounded within the Ministry of Finance, but we can see all over the ministries, sectors in the country. So downstream bodies, so which includes both sector ministries and agencies, including education and health providers, right, which deliver and fund services under the policy direction of the government. Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, and other ministries, and other agencies like government agencies, for example, some commissions, RTI, Commission, Right Information, and other agencies like uh, uh, so there are some institutions which established for the purpose of implementing the government policies. Uh, we can name some, for example, a truck, uh, dangerous dangerous trucks prevention board. It's an agency of the government, and the National Water Supply and Drainage Board is a agents of the government, and Department of Policy, that is. So there are different institutions which through which institutes through these institutions government has influenced their policies. So these are very not much uh, they are not much popular one, right? So when I say uh, uh, Central Bank of Sri Lanka, everybody of us knows, right? Because it's coming under the upstream bodies. It's very important for the government. The Ministry of Finance, everybody knows. So there are ministries, so many of us may does not know. So you can find such kind of institutions here, right? Here you can find the ministries. Here, Ministry of Defense. It's coming under the core, right? So it's very important for the stability of the government. So uh, the His Excellency President has took that ministry on his control, and Ministry of Technology and Ministry of Economic Policies and Plan Implementation. It's very important, right? The Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Economic Policies, Plan Implementation is very important. And Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa is the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. He has taken not he's not taken co-ministries, right? And Nimal Siripala, Ministry of Labour, Foreign Ministry, right? Honorable GL Perez, so Foreign Minister, right? And other ministries here: Ministry of Education, Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Welfare, Forest Civilization, Ministry of Public Service, right? So these ministries are not core, right? Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Mass Media, Ministry of Highways. These are the downstream. And Ministry of Finance is a very important ministry, right? And we can find the government agencies in Sri Lanka. So first, Sri Lankan intelligence agencies, right? Law enforcement agencies of Sri Lanka, Bandaranaike International Diplomatic Training Institute, Board of Investment, and Information and Communication Technology Agency, ICTAT, right? And National Building Research Organization, National Library and Documentation Service Board, National Science Library and Resource Center, Office of Missing Person, Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, Secretariat for Coordinating the Peace Process, Sri Lanka Institute of Development Administration, Sri Lanka Sustainable Energy Authority, State Intelligence Service. So these are the government agencies in Sri Lanka, right? So these agencies are coming under downstream, right? So most of us don't know sometimes. These agencies are not popular, but when you compare these agencies with central bank, so it's a very popular one, right? So downstream bodies include both sector ministries and agencies, including education and health providers, which deliver and fund services under the policy direction of the government. So the policies are already uh, proposed by the Ministry of Finance, Minister of Finance. It will be implemented through central bank, right? And also, meanwhile, the downstream bodies also uh, work according to the policies of the government. So the downstream, right? The downstream bodies. They also include a diverse group of more autonomous bodies such as regulators and state-owned enterprises and corporate bodies, which in many countries still provide the majority of infrastructure services despite an extensive privatization, right? Uh, so when you compare, right, upstream bodies and downstream bodies, in the upstream bodies, you can find the very important government ministries and the departments and the institutions. So when you look at the downstream bodies, so most of the organizations, government organization, all of the government owned companies, corporation, statutory bodies, authorities coming under downstream bodies, most of them. So non-executive state institutions include judiciaries. Judiciary, judiciary means that the court, right? Legal system, high court, supreme court, like that. Judi- Judiciaries, legislatures, and institutions such as supreme audit institutions, right? And Department of Auditor General, Department of Register of Companies. So these are coming under non-executive state institutions. So they are independent, right? Uh, Sometime you may confuse whether a particular organization belongs to public sector or private sector. When I talk about Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education, or Ministry of Agriculture, everybody can say it's a government organization because it's a ministry. It's a ministry. And Department of Education, it's a ministry. Department of Police, it's a ministry. Department of Election, it's coming under ministry. So it's a public sector organization. And there are some organizations people are confusing about. So when I talk about SLIT, Sri Lanka Institute of Information Technology, does it public sector? Is that coming under public sector or private sector? Anybody else? SLIT, SLIT, Sri Lanka Institute of Information Technology. Is that government organization, public sector or private sector organization?
Public sector.
Public sector, right? And say for example, other Sri Lanka Telecom, which sector? Sri Lanka Telecom,
Public.
Sri Lankan Airlines, Balangoda Plantation. There are some confusion, right? So you can find what are the government-owned companies. Here you may find government-owned Sri Lanka. Bank of Ceylon, Central Bank of Sri Lanka, right? It's a commercial corporation, right? Uh, Airport and Aviation Service, Lanka Limited, the Associated Newspaper Limited, PCC Lanka Limited, Building Material Corporation, Ceylon Fertilizer Company, Ceylon Shipping Corporation, right? Colombo Stock Market Limited, Lanka Mineral and Science, Lanka Fabric Limited, Lanka Satosa. So these are the companies belongs to the government of Sri Lanka. Here STC, State Trading Corporation, Sri Lanka Rubber Manufacturing Export Company Limited, Skill Development Fund, Milco. So these are the government-owned companies. Right. So to decide a particular organization belongs to public sector or private sector, there are some questions. There are almost 8 questions. If the answer for these 8 questions, yes, If you got the answer yes for these following 8 questions, then you can decide, you can come to the conclusion that the particular company, a particular institution belongs to the public sector. Here, according to the Institute of Internal Accountants, positive answers mean yes, yes, no means a negative answer. So positive answer to most of these criteria listed below will place an organization within the boundary of public sector. So there are 8 questions. If your answers out of 8, most of the majority of the answers are yes, then you can decide that particular organization belongs to public sector. The first question: does the organization deliver programs, goods, or services that can be considered a public good or that are established by the government policy? If the answer is yes, so keep it in your mind. Uh, uh, Bring organization in your mind, right? And you can ask the questions. The first question, say, uh, what we call CEB, right? Keep in your mind CEB and ask this question: does the organization deliver programs, goods, or services that can be considered a public good or that are established by the government policy? If for CEB, the answer is yes. Yeah, it provides electricity services, and it is established, the CEB is established by the government policy. And second question is substantially all of the organization's funding provided by the government or determined by the government policy. Who is the funder? Organization funding provided by, if the treasury provide the fund for the organization, it's a public sector. If not, no. Is the organization or accountable to, and does it report directly to the government, including government department or agency or a minister of the government? To whom its reports, its financial reports or annual reports submitted to whom they are accountable for? When you think about CEB, to whom they have to accountable for? So CEB comes under which ministry? Ceylon Electricity Board comes under which ministry? Any question? Any answers? Ministry of Power, right? Ministry of Power. And fourth question: if the organization has a board of directors, commission, or similar appointed body, does government control a majority of appointment? So if you have confusion about whether the organization belongs to government sector or public sector or private sector, look at uh, the board of directors. Sometimes we call uh, the council, right? Who is appoint that member of the board? Who is appointing the board of directors, member of the board of directors? So if the appointments come from the government side, it's a appointment is coming from the president or prime minister or the particular line minister, secretary. So then the answer yes, then it will be belongs to public sector. If the organization has share capital, is government the majority shareholders? Sri Lanka Telecom is a company, but it issues shares, but majority of the shares in the hand of the government. Therefore, so we can conclude that Sri Lanka Telecom is uh, under the coming under public sector. Are the organization's employees member of the public service, subject to public service rules and receiving public service benefits? establishment court, financial regulations. If a particular organization follows financial regulations and establishment court, e-court, or any benefit provided by the government, if the employees are eligible to get that, then we can say that the organization is a public sector organization, right? E-court, we can say that it's a HR guide, human resource guide, right? How to allocate leave, how to get appointed, how to get promoted. So this kind of things is available in the e-court. So it's very important when you work somewhere else in the government sector organization. That you can find in right. So establishment code is the what HR guide, human resource guide. So it says about how to get leave, how many months, how many days a particular employee is eligible to get uh, no pay or annual leaves, casual leaves. So all the stuffs is outlined in the e-code, establishment code. And so question number 7, overall, does government control directly or indirectly the organization policies, operations, administrations, or service delivery? And so if the answer is yes, then we can decide the company, a particular organization belongs to public sector. And question number 8, is there a legislative requirement for the organization to be audited by the government auditor or supreme audit organization? So what is a supreme audit organization in Sri Lanka? Supreme audit organization. So normally if the company, for companies, private companies, public company, corporate companies, uh, normally those companies will be audited by uh, audit firms, independent audit firms. But when we talk about public companies or government organizations, the auditors coming from where? Which department? From which organization? Any answers? So which department uh, provide the audit service to the government sector organization, public sector organization? Which organization? Any answers? Any answers? Department of Auditor General. Department, right? Auditor General Department. National Audit Office, right? This is a Supreme Audit Office. And this is the establishment court, right? Establishment court of the government of the Domestic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. This is second volume, and you can find it was published in 1999. And this is the Auditor General Department website, right? So, is there a legislative requirement for the organization to be audited by the government auditor or supreme audit organization? If the answer is yes, then we can categorize the organization as a public sector organization. And scope of public sector. So, according to the Institute of Internal Accountants (IIA), public sector organizations may exist at any of four levels: international, national, regional, or local. So international is a multi-state entities or partnership. Say for example, United Nations, it's a government, right? European Union, it's a government, and SAC. So when you compare with SAC and European Union, the European Union is the most powerful government, right? It's an international organization, right? National, so independent states, Sri Lankan government, right? So when you look at the European Union, all the countries under the European Union should follow the policies of the European Union. But SAC, so it's kind of cooperation among governments in South Asia, so they don't have such kind of arrangements, right? National, uh, the government of Sri Lanka is a uh, national level, and uh, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education. This is a national level institution. Regional. So there are some organizations regional. For example, Provincial Ministry of Education, Provincial Ministry of Health, Provincial Ministry of uh, Land, and other provincial level organizations like regional level. For example, UA Development Bank and other regional bank, right? And also you can find RDHs, Regional Development, RDHs, the Regional Director of Health Services, and some local institutions, say Municipal Council, right? Colombo Municipal Council, Kennedy Municipal Council, right? So it's the municipal level bodies such as city or country, right? So these are the organizations, for example, uh, Colombo Municipal Council. So they scope the boundary within the limit of Colombo city limit. So they can't interfere the affairs out of the city of Colombo. Right? And regional, if any organizations that belongs to the Eastern Province, they their scope is the Eastern Province. They can't interfere other province affairs. At any of these levels, the public sector generally consists of at least three types of organizations. So I told you the core government. So purely it's a government organization. Core government, for example, ministries and a department. So people who are working in ministries and departments are eligible to get pension, government pension, no pension. So those people are working under the core government, they are getting pension, employees. So, core government. Agencies like central bank, and also we have seen there are a lot of agencies. the government organizations, so which are responsible to implement the government policies. And public enterprises like Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, uh, Ceylon Electricity Board, National Water Supply and Drainage Board, and Road Development Authority. So these are the public enterprises. So they are established for the purpose of earning profit, making profit on market basis. In state businesses, most of them are companies like Sri Lanka Telecom, Sri Lanka Sand Limited, Sand and Mineral Limited, and Pelvatta Plantation. So there are some companies. Sri Lankan Airlines. These are the state businesses. And public contractors, CECB, right? Public contractors. So now let us discuss what are the what do you mean by the co-government? So co-government consists of governing body with a defined territorial authority. Co-government consists of governing body with defined territorial authority. And co-governments include all departments, ministries, or branches of the government that are integral part of the structure. Say, for example, provincial council and municipal council, Pradesh Sabha, and urban council, like that. It's a part of the government and are accountable to and report directly to the central authority, the the legislature, council, cabinet, executive head. So they are accountable. They have to report to the head of the country. So the head of the country includes what? Cabinet or ministries, and secretary or president or executive board. Let's see government agencies. Government agencies consist of public uh, organizations that are clearly a part of the government and deliver public programs, goods, or services, but that exist as separate organization in their own right, possibly as legal entities, and operate with a partial degree of operational independence, right? So agencies, the most easy example is the central bank. It's a government agencies, right? So they often, but not necessarily, are headed by a board of directors, commission, or other appointed bodies. So we can say other commissions. There are commissions appointed by the His Excellency President. So the commission, RTI Commission, Right to Information Commission, and there are different commissions. Right? So these commissions are coming under government agencies. So they have to perform a specific task on behalf of the government. Public enterprises. So public enterprises are agencies that deliver public programs, goods, or services, but operate independently of the government and often have their own sources of revenue in addition to direct public funding. So like so basically it was established by public funding, right? Public funding, and then this type of organizations will run by itself without depending on government funding further. So for example, SLIT, Sri Lanka Institute of Information Technology, it's basically funded by the government, but now it's operating as a independent body. It's earn profit and it gives profit to the treasury, make earnings, and self-sufficient, right? They are self income generating institutions. So public enterprises are agencies that deliver public programs, goods or services. So SLEETs provide what education services. Like CEV, they provide electricity, like National Water Board and Drainage, National Water Supply and Drainage Board, providing services, goods and services, right? So basically, it's funded by the government, but also it generates revenue, like so often have their own source of revenues, like Ports Authority, Sri Lanka Ports Authority, the generating own source of revenue. So they also may compete in private markets and they make profits. Right? They also may compete in private market. So Sri Lanka Telecom, not Sri Lanka Telecom here, People's Bank, Bank of Sri Lanka. So they compete in the market, finance market. They compete with commercial banks, compete with uh, other private banks. However, in most cases, the government is the major shareholder, and these enterprises partly follow the act and regulations that govern the co-government. Right? So when you look at uh, the ministries and departments, they are totally depends on financial regulations and establishment codes. So what are the things uh, available in the FR and establishment code which are directly applicable to the department and ministries? So whatever the things proposed by the budget, also whatever the benefits declared by the finance minister in the budget, it's applicable, automatically applicable for that employees. But there are some organizations, employees, so they are not able to get the benefit directly, so they have to get some sort of approvals and other things. So Sri Lanka Telecom is one of the government company. Even if the government organization, it's not follow the financial regulation and establishment code. They have their own circulars, act, and the Sri Lanka Telecom follows Sri Lanka accounting standards when they're preparing accounts. Right? So they have some sort of here. The most cases, government is the major shareholder in Sri Lankan Airlines and Sri Lanka Telecom. So government is a major shareholder, and these enterprises partially follow the act and regulations, partially, not fully, not like ministries and departments that govern the co-government. State businesses, state means government businesses, outside this outside this clear public sector area is a gray zone or boundary zone with two type of organizations that might or might not be part of the public sector. Sometimes we confuse about the organization whether it belongs to government sector, it belongs to private sector, right? State businesses are government owned and controlled businesses that sells goods or services for profit. Here the objective is making profit in the private market, although they do not deliver what would be considered public programs, goods or services. They might be considered part of the public sector, right? So say for example, uh, Sri Lanka Telecom is a state business organization. They compete with Dialog, Mobitel, and other network providers, and Sri Lankan Airlines, they are competing with other airlines, Indian Airlines, British Airways, right? So they are competing with other airlines, state-owned businesses. So public contractors. So are legally independent entities outside the government and receive public funding under contract or agreement to deliver public programs, goods or services as their primary business. Due to primarily to their limited public control, these organizations usually would be classified as not for profit or private sector entities. So, for example, CECB, Central Bureau of Engineering, Central Engineering, CECB, Consultancy Bureau, right? So they are undertaking the government contracts. So when you look at this diagram, so core government, it includes government ministries and departments, right? Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, so everything, all ministries coming under the core environment, and also it core government includes the departments, government departments, Department of Education and Department of Elections, right? Department of Police department, right? So all government ministries and departments coming under the core and agencies, the blue line, like Central Bank of Sri Lanka and other agencies, right? Foreign Employment Bureau and Atomic Energy Agency, right? There are many agencies. So public enterprises like CEB, Ceylon Electricity Board, and Ceylon Petroleum Corporations, Sri Lanka Rubahini Corporations, right? So these are the coming under public enterprises. And here it's a gray area, right? See the color. So sometimes they are confused about whether the particular organizations belongs to public sector or private sector. For example, SNIT and Green University, NSBM Green University. So NSBM Green University is a public sector or private sector? NSBM public sector or private sector? Any question? Any answers?
Public sector.
Public sector. Here, see how it appears. It's a public sector organization, but it's look a private sector, no? So this is the university. So it belongs to the public sector. You can find about us. It will. Right, it's a public sector, but here it's coming under the gray area, right? Gray or boundary zone. State businesses and public contractors. So when it's a hierarchy, right? Where it at the core, at the center point of this cycle, so there's no doubt it's a government organization, public sector organization, and it's travel along with towards the border. Yeah, from the central point, it's a core. So the influence of the government going reduces, right? Here, public sector of Sri Lanka. Here, central government. Central government includes ministries and departments under the central government. Ministries and departments. And provincial government, provincial councils, local government, municipal council, urban council, Pradesh Sabha, state-owned enterprises like that. And commercial under the state-owned enterprises, you can find statutory boards. National Water Supply and Drainage Board is coming under statutory body, and CB and Road Development Authority is coming under statutory boards. And commercial corporations like Sri Lanka Petroleum Corporation, Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, Sri Lanka Robo Corporations coming under state-owned enterprises. And government-owned companies like Sri Lanka Telecom and other companies, Sri Lankan Airlines, government-owned companies. Let us discuss the functions of public sector. So downstream, the public sector delivers output that directly matters to the citizens and firms, right? So downstream, we have discussed what is the downstream. So it includes ministries and other departments which are not coming under the upstream agency, right? Uh, Downstream, the public sector delivers output that directly matters to the citizen. So it's the services provided by the downstream public sector organizations are important for the citizens and the firms, companies, or other organizations of the country. It provides firms and household with services such as health and education, housing, transport, electricity, or security through direct provision and through funding. It manages infrastructure and other public investments which the private sector may be unable to finance, for which the private sector may be unwilling to bear all the risk. So that's why the government has provided this kind of services. For example, railway. Is it possible to provide this service by the private sector? Is it possible to provide railway services? And is it possible to private sector to offer highways, to construct highways in Sri Lanka? Is it possible by the is it possible to provide these services by private sector? Does it possible? And does it possible to provide security services for the country and education service, right? So that's why the government has establishes a downstream public sector organization and provide these services. So it regulates social economic behavior when necessary, such as food and road transport safety. So motor traffic, when you travel to the road, you can find there are motor traffics. So imagine if there is no motor traffic in the road, so imagine what will happen. So they are protecting, they are trying to avoid misbehavior in the road transportation. So they are ensuring transport safety. And think about if the military service, defense provided by the private sector, what will happen? Right? And there are some agencies, food production agencies. It should be provided by the government. And police service, right? If it is provided by the private sector, so what will happen? So equally importantly, it develops and manages competing policy proposals proactively, ideally identifying emerging social and economic challenges and proposing solutions, and it sets sector policy objectives such as reimbursement method for allocating recurrent budgets to the hospitals, incentives for water and use efficient. Here there's a diagram. So the public sector, it includes center of the government, sometimes called upstream, and sector agencies, state-owned enterprises, and corporate bodies. So downstream. So its functions, sector output, the service provided, regulations. So they implement regulations, right? Like jurisdictional commission and Ministry of Justice. Infrastructure investment like road development, power network, and water supply, and sector policies. And also here both physical and institutional sustainability, realistic and achievable revenue targets they have set, and cooperations between level of governments. So you may find there are different level of government, central government, provincial government, local government, and support for oversight bodies. So they are supervising something. And effective management of fiscal policy and aggregates is normally done as primarily is done by uh, central bank. So objectives and subjective development outcomes, right? And functions of public sector. The public sector is also responsible for some less tangible but equally critical outcomes. It must encourage both fiscal and institutional sustainability. It must provide systems and processes that enable government to manage public revenues, expenditure, and debt, ensuring that they remain within agreed fiscal aggregates. And it must manage the allocation of fiscal, administrative, and functional authorities across level of government in the way that ensures cooperative and constructive engagement between them. So the public sector must also work with support, accountability, and governance mechanism. So judiciaries, legislation, and other non-executive state institutions such as Supreme Audit Institution in, say, uh, Department of Auditor General, to ensure that they provide transparency through credible arm's length oversights. So that's all about the this unit, and hopefully we will continue the second unit. Second unit is uh, again public sector financial management, so introductory chapter. So we will see the second part in the next class. Okay, thank you very much.